From a significant tornado outbreak being possible across portions of the Midwest tomorrow afternoon and evening to our first tropical storm of the season likely to make landfall in southeastern Texas or southwestern Louisiana later this week. This is your Chonkita weather forecast for June 16th, 2026. First of all, looking at the current day 2 SPC severe weather outlook for tomorrow, we still have a moderate risk of severe weather across central Illinois into northwestern Indiana, where our highest tornado threat will be, and we do also have an enhanced risk of severe weather from south central Missouri back into western Ohio. For tornado risk tomorrow, we now have a 15% tornado risk across central Illinois back into northwestern Indiana, and our 10% tornado risk extends from northeastern Missouri all the way back into northeastern Indiana, and our SIG 1 area is all the way from central and north central Illinois back into northwestern and north central Indiana, where we could see a few intense and possibly long track tornadoes tomorrow afternoon or evening. And we also have a 5% tornado risk from central Missouri and southeastern Iowa back into northwestern and western Ohio, and our SIG 1 area extends across most of the area, excluding a sliver of more into central Ohio there as well, and we could see a few strong tornadoes in the area tomorrow, including parts of our 10% and 5% tornado risk, and our 2% tornado risk extends from southeastern Minnesota and southeastern Kansas all the way into central Ohio, where a couple to a few isolated tornadoes will be possible tomorrow, and we could also see a 2% tornado risk at some work from southeastern Texas back into southwestern Alabama for tomorrow with our tropical system, if the tornado threat seems to be higher down in that area, which we'll talk about in a minute. But going on to our wind risk, we still only have a 30% wind risk from central Missouri all the way back into western Ohio, where we could see some decently widespread damaging wind gusts tomorrow, and our SIG 1 area extends from southeastern Kansas all the way back into southern Michigan and northwestern Ohio, where we could see some hurricane force wind gusts ranging from 75 to 85 miles an hour. I wouldn't be surprised again if they do add a 45% risk area sometime tomorrow across like northeastern Missouri back into northwestern Indiana, and they also could add a SIG 2 area somewhere in the area as well, but I'm not too certain on that as of now, so make sure you pay attention to the actual official forecast for more information. We do also have a 15% wind risk area from southeastern Kansas and eastern Iowa all the way into central Ohio, where we could see some scattered damaging wind gusts tomorrow, and even outside the SIG 1 area, we could still see some wind gusts reaching 65 to 70 miles an hour, and our 5% wind risk extends for southeastern Minnesota and northern Oklahoma back into western West Virginia and western Pennsylvania, and we do also have a 5% damaging wind risk across southeastern Texas all the way back into southeastern Mississippi and a sliver of southwestern Alabama, where in those areas we could see some isolated damaging wind gusts up to 60 to 65 miles an hour tomorrow. And for hail risk, we do have a low hail risk tomorrow. We actually now have an expanded 30% hail risk from northeastern Missouri into southeastern Iowa and west central Illinois, where we can see some decently widespread hail in that area. And our 15% hail risk extends from southeastern Minnesota and southeastern Kansas back into southern Michigan and northwestern Ohio, and our SIG 1 area extends from southeastern Kansas and southeastern Minnesota all the way back into northwestern Ohio, where we could see some hail reaching potentially up to the size of baseballs tomorrow afternoon and evening, and our 5% hail risk extends from north central Oklahoma and southern Minnesota all the way back into much of Ohio, where we can see some isolated large hail up to the size of ping pong balls tomorrow. Now looking at the discussion they have for this forecast, you can see in the summary they are saying an outbreak of severe thunderstorms is expected across portions of Illinois and Indiana tomorrow, with intense tornadoes with damaging wind gusts up to 80 miles an hour and hail to 2.5 inches in diameter being expected. We're talking about a strong mid-level jet streak that will overspread parts of the Midwest and lower Great Lakes tomorrow with a deep surface low, which could get down to the upper 880s or 980s, in millibars. And there will also be a strong low-level jet, which will bring very rich surface moisture, which we could see some dew points of up to the low 70s in some areas, and we will also see a warm front that will lift north into northern Illinois and northern Indiana, Ohio, which the south of that will remain tornado threat. Is going to be north of that. You'll mainly see some scattered large hail and some scattered damaging wind gusts up to 75 miles an hour. You can see they are saying a more substantial severe threat is expected to develop perhaps by early to mid-afternoon. It depends strongly upon how much more convection evolves spatially, which basically means if it stays mostly north of our warm front, we could see a more significant severe weather threat. I wouldn't even rule out a high risk of severe weather for tornadoes if we don't really see a ton of more convection, but again, a little bit of more convection could be helpful with boundary interaction, but we also don't want too much. They are saying, given the strong moisture convection into the region, it's reasonable to expect an area of relatively rapid air mass recovery from across these vicinity into parts of central Illinois. So again, once more convection will likely move out sometime in the early to mid-afternoon, and within a few hours, it's going to rapidly recover into a very significant tornado environment. Storms that form in this environment near the surface, low such warm front will likely be the screen and take advantage of the strong low-level shear, which means basically they will have less interaction with river storms, which means they won't get much disruption. But again, we will still probably need a little bit of merger interaction or nudgers, maybe some boundary interaction, which is why the near the surface level warm front will be favorable for more discrete supercells. We're also seeing large to very large hail, significant wind gusts, and strong to intense tornadoes will all be possible as convection moves eastward into Indiana. The low-level moisture will be improving with time, so I wouldn't be surprised if we do eventually see a larger 10% and 15% tornado risk areas, and if we see more convection in our main risk areas to the south of the cold front, we could even potentially see them consider issuing a high risk of severe weather for tornadoes in future outlooks. So make sure you keep paying attention to future SPC outlooks and keep paying attention for future weather forecasts on my channel for more information. Next, looking at the current day 1 excessive rainfall outlook from the Weather Prediction Center, you can see we now have a moderate risk of excessive rainfall across southeastern Texas, back into southern and central Louisiana and southwestern Mississippi, where we could see some scattered significant flash flooding and some widespread flash flooding overall across those areas, and there's at least a 40% chance of flash flooding within your local areas over this time span of a couple to a few hours. We have a slight risk of excessive rainfall surrounding that across more of southeastern Texas, back into portions of southern and central Alabama, western Georgia, and the Florida Panhandle as well, where we can see some scattered flash flooding with some isolated significant flash flooding in those areas. And we do have a marginal risk of excessive rainfall across southeastern and eastern Texas, back into much of Georgia and north central Florida as well. And we have a small marginal risk of flash flooding across southeastern Florida, and in those areas we could see some isolated flash flooding overall, and nothing too significant should happen in those areas. But make sure you have multiple ways to receive flash flood warnings if you're in the slight risk or especially the moderate risk areas. Next, looking at the day 2 excessive rainfall outlook for tomorrow, we currently have a moderate risk of excessive rainfall across southeastern Texas and southwestern Louisiana, where again we could see some widespread flash flooding and some scattered significant flash flooding as well. And we also have a slight risk of excessive rainfall across southeastern Texas into central and southern Louisiana, back into southern and central Mississippi and southwestern Alabama there. And we also have a slight risk of excessive rainfall from southeastern Kansas and extreme northeastern Oklahoma, back into portions of southern and central Michigan, southern Wisconsin all the way back into western Pennsylvania and northwestern West Virginia tomorrow. In those areas, we will likely see some scattered flash flooding, and we could see some isolated significant flash flooding, and we do have a marginal risk of excessive rainfall of flash flooding there across northern and Louisiana and eastern Texas all the way back into northern Florida and southern Georgia. We have another one across much of the Great Lakes and Midwest areas, and we have another one to the farther south areas of southeastern Florida, and in those areas we could again see some isolated flash flooding. And now looking at the day 3 excessive rainfall outlook, this will be for Thursday. You can see we have a moderate risk of excessive rainfall across northeastern and north central and central Louisiana, back into southern and central Mississippi, into central Alabama, and a sliver of west central Georgia, where again we could see some ice or scattered significant flash flooding and some widespread flash flooding overall. And by this time, the tropical system, which will likely become a tropical storm before landfall, will move somewhat inland, so the flash flooding threat does look like it will be more inland on this day. But our slight risk of excessive rainfall extends into portions of the Mississippi River Valley and across parts of the southeast United States as well, where we could see some scattered flash flooding, and again, some isolated significant flash flooding cannot be ruled out. And our marginal risk of excessive rainfall extends across many of those same areas, and we also have a marginal risk of excessive rainfall across portions of northeast New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. So if you're in those areas, you could see some isolated flash flooding on Thursday as the systems start to move east and northeast. And before we get into our weather models for the severe weather tomorrow, I did want to talk some about Potential Tropical Cyclone One, which will likely become a tropical storm as it moves towards its landfall location. So you can see right now is still located over extreme south-central Texas, but it will move over the Gulf of America, the northwestern Gulf of America, or the Gulf of Mexico, whatever you want to call it, over the next several hours, and eventually by tomorrow morning it will be a low-end tropical storm there, and we already have tropical storm watches out for portions of southeastern Texas and southwest Louisiana, where you can see some tropical storm force winds, and those could move further inland if the system has a bigger wind field than is currently expected, but it would expect to see some slightly further inland, but eventually it'll make landfall sometime on Wednesday afternoon into the overnight hours on Wednesday, depending on how the system tracks or how fast it moves, and it will likely make landfall somewhere near the Texas and Louisiana border, so it'll be hard to tell which day it makes landfall in, but eventually it will move inland overnight on Wednesday, or over the evening and overnight on Wednesday if it makes landfall earlier, and by 7 a.m. on Thursday it will likely be a tropical depression over northeastern Louisiana, and it shouldn't really last much longer as a tropical system after that, but I will provide more updates if something major changes with this system. Now look at the forecast advisory for Potential Tropical Cyclone One. You can see right now it's moving northeast at 5 knots, which is about 5 miles an hour, which is relatively slow even for a tropical cyclone. You can see right now it has winds sustained up to 25 knots, which is 30 miles an hour, of wind gusts up to 35 knots, which is 40 miles an hour. So it already has some tropical storm wind gusts, but nothing really too significant. But you can see by tomorrow morning, it's expected to become a tropical storm with sustained winds of 35 miles an hour, which is 40 miles an hour. I meant knots, 35 knots. And it will have some wind gusts up to 45 knots, which is 50 miles an hour. And by the time it makes landfall, will likely be about the same strength. It could reach up to 40 knots, maybe if the strength is a little, which would mean would have sustained winds at 45 miles an hour, wind gusts potentially reaching up to 60 miles an hour, which wouldn't really make much of a difference, just a little bit more intense of a tropical storm. And then by Thursday morning, it will have moved inland. It will be a tropical depression with sustained winds of around 25 knots, which is actually the same as it is now. That is 30 miles an hour with wind gusts up to 35 knots, which is 40 miles an hour. And then after that, it will slowly dissipate by around 0Z on Friday, so it doesn't look like it's going to last very long, but again, I would still pay attention to the system, as flooding does seem to be the main threat compared to winds. Now looking at the model intensity guidance for Potential Tropical Cyclone One, which this is from Tropical Tidbits. You can see most of the models have it becoming a high-end tropical depression or low-end tropical storm within the next 24 to 36 hours, and eventually will make landfall and slowly weaken, and then you just have the HFAI, which basically is just showing it randomly becomes a Category 1 hurricane inland, which is not going to happen. But you can see most of the weather models have it staying around the high-end tropical depression to low-end tropical storm range as it moves inland. And you can see at around 156 to 160 hours, which is almost a week out from now, you can see some of the weather models actually have it strengthening, which could be as an extratropical system, or it could form into a tropical storm again after it moves over water again. So we'll have to watch to see if anything happens like a week from now with this system, because that's actually quite interesting. I'll have to watch that in future model runs. And now look at the satellite imagery for Potential Tropical Cyclone One. Now you got this satellite imagery from Colorado State University on their satellite imagery website here. If we look at the satellite imagery for the system, you can see there's some thunderstorm activity wrapping around it from the south and the east there, but you can still see some scattered thunderstorm activity across southern Texas there, which the system will gain more thunderstorm activity as it strengthens to a tropical depression and eventually a tropical storm. If we play the satellite loop here, you can see it has been rotating over the last several hours with some thunderstorm activity wrapping around the center. You can see there's also some inflow coming into it from the south, and you can see there's some outflow going towards the northeast as well and to the north. It is rotating quite well over here, but there's still no ton of convection around the center right now, which is why it's not a tropical storm and also is inland right now. But as it moves over to the northwestern Gulf of America or Gulf of Mexico, whatever you want to call it right now, it will likely strengthen to a tropical storm around 35 to 45 miles an hour before making landfall. Now, looking at some of our weather models starting to control the HRRR, I'm not really going to go in depth because I tried to, but it kept messing up with things like pictures and sounds and stuff, and that is not good for my video, so I'm just going to go over the reflectivity here, even though I want to go more in depth. So you can see by 12Z, we will have some morning convection across much of the Midwest there, from northern Illinois and much of Iowa back up to Wisconsin and Minnesota and even North Dakota there. If we go to 15Z here, you can see the morning convection because of an MCS across eastern Wisconsin and northern Illinois there, and that could impact some of our severe weather areas. If we go to 18Z now, you can see some elevated thunderstorms across northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. Those won't really produce much of a tornado threat there, and our MCS continues to move east. And by the time we get to 20Z, you can see much of our warm sector is mostly clear there, and we only have some mainly hail producers, maybe some big hail producers up there towards northern Illinois, but nothing too significant up there. Maybe some hail reaching up to 2.5 inches there. If we go to 22Z, you can clearly see some zebra cells are starting to form there, with a potential for some intense tornadoes across central and northern Illinois there. And eventually by 23Z, you can see a couple discrete zebra cells across central Illinois, and another one moving in a semi-discrete zebra cell moving into northwestern Indiana. Those will have our highest tornado threat, but we even have a supercell back there in east central Missouri that could cause some problems. And by the time we get to 1Z, which is 8 p.m. Central Time, it mainly becomes linear with a damaging wind threat. And as we move forward, we can still have some severe storms with a tornado threat and a damaging wind threat in eastern southern Ohio, southeastern Illinois, moving into northern Kentucky and southern Indiana. At 6Z Thursday, which is 1 a.m. Central Time, producing again a tornado and damaging wind threat. And as we get towards 12Z on Thursday, you can see around 7 a.m. Central Time, all the convection has moved out of the area, and we have some scattered leftover thunderstorms from mainly just some pop-up thunderstorms there across portions of southern Missouri. Now, starting at 12Z on Wednesday, which is 7 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday, on the 15Z wrap, you can see it has a morning convection across northern Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Eventually, by 15Z, that will all start to move east, and we still do have some convection behind that, but in that line there across central and northern Illinois, back into southern Wisconsin, central Wisconsin, where we could see some damaging wind gusts up to 60 to 80 miles an hour, so we could see a early morning wind threat. It doesn't look like it would be much of a tornado threat, but I couldn't rule out a tornado or two within that line. By the time we get to 18Z on Wednesday, you can see it has a line of thunderstorms forming right behind it, so it's actually over-convex, and if that didn't happen, we would have a lower tornado threat, but I'm not too confident in that, because the last few runs before this were showing a more significant tornado threat, so this could be just like an outlier on the HRRR here. By 0Z or by 21Z, you can actually see some saber cells starting to fire in northern Missouri. By 23Z, you have a line of potential supercells across west central Illinois back into northern Missouri. And eventually by 1Z, you have a lot of thunderstorms forming there, which could bring a significant damaging wind threat. This is part of a raise of a may upgrade to 45% wind risk or a SIG 2 wind risk across portions of eastern Missouri, central and northern Illinois, back into northern Indiana there. And if we go to 6Z, you can still see we could have a tornado for a kind of broken line there. We have one line across central Ohio back into southern Indiana, another one across western Ohio back into southern Illinois there. We could still see a damaging wind threat and an isolated tornado threat by then. And eventually those storms are moved out by 12Z on Thursday, where our new severe weather threat will end up across portions of the mid-Atlantic of the northeast by tomorrow morning into tomorrow afternoon. You can see just some scattered thunderstorm activity to the south of our main risk area on Thursday. And finally, looking at the 12Z NAM Nest, or the 12Z NAM 3K, whatever you want to call it, a thing for the same model. We're starting at 12Z on Wednesday. You can see only a little bit of morning convection across eastern Iowa at 7 a.m. But by the time we get to around 15Z, if it'll overload here, you can see a more significant MCS across central Illinois, actually, which could hurt our tornado threat. That could bring some damaging wind gusts up to 70 miles an hour, and potentially a couple of isolated tornadoes in the morning of Wednesday. By the time we get towards 18Z here, you can see the morning convection is weakening, and we only have some weak elevated convection across mainly our north of our risk area, but a little bit of a risk area could get affected. And by the time we get to Triangle, you can see some storms firing across northern Missouri. And by the time we get to Triangle 2Z, you can see a few discrete to semi-discrete supercells across northern and central Missouri back to north central and northeastern Illinois there, which could bring an intense to violent tornado threat to some areas if this did verify like this. And by the time we get to 0Z on Thursday, you can see there's no line behind it, which would mean there's really nothing else to worry about, but there obviously will be a line behind it. By the time we get to 6Z, you can see there's still a small line of thunderstorms behind it, but it's not significant as it shows on the HRRR or the RAP or the regular NAM, so that would be interesting. But as we move towards 12Z on Thursday, which is 7 a.m. on Thursday, we still have a small line of thunderstorms across northern Kentucky and western West Virginia. And then eventually that line will weaken with some scattered thunderstorm activity through the evening of Thursday, but nothing too significant there. Anyways, that is the end of today's weather forecast. If you're in the impacted areas for tomorrow's severe weather event, especially the enhanced and especially the moderate risk tomorrow, make sure you have multiple ways to receive tornado warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings, and even some flash flood warnings in case anything significant happens in your area. And if you're in southeastern Texas, southern Louisiana, back into portions of Mississippi, make sure you're prepared for what will likely become a tropical storm with our potential tropical cyclone one over the next couple of days. And make sure you're prepared for not only the strong winds, although they won't likely be too strong, but mainly the significant flooding, which could have some significant and potentially deadly flooding across those areas for several days, like 3 or 4 or 5 days even, so make sure to prepare for that, and I will see you on my next weather forecast tomorrow. Goodbye!